Tonight we continue our look at the future of news in the age of technology. Computing is rapidly changing how we get the news, how journalists and writers report it, and even how we participate in it. And the reach is far beyond news into almost every form of written human communication. The bold new online initiative by our guest tonight is at the vanguard of this change. It's called Medium. There are lots of ways to describe Medium, but I would at least start by saying it's one part information stream, one part publishing platform, and one part human network. It's putting those elements together in a way we've not quite seen on the internet, and it's proving to be a game changer. The founder of Medium is Evan Williams. I've often dreamed of a startup event here at the museum called When Lightning Strikes Twice, and Ev Williams would be guest number one. He is the co-founder of two of the biggest internet services ever. The first was Blogger, which he founded in 1999 and sold to Google in 2003. It was the first company Google ever acquired. His second startup was Twitter, which he co-founded in 2006 and served as CEO for 2 years, and he remains on Twitter's board. Joining him tonight is a very good friend of the museum, Stephen Levy. For 30 years, Stephen has been an award-winning journalist covering Silicon Valley and the global technology revolution. Since the early 1980s, he's worked for some of the biggest names in the business: Rolling Stone, Newsweek, Wired Magazine. He shook the publishing world quite vigorously about a year ago when he announced he was leaving Wired to join Medium and launch a tech hub within that service called Backchannel. They are disruptive, they are fun, and they will be a lot of fun to talk to tonight. Please join me in welcoming Evan Williams and Stephen Levy. Hi. Come on over. Hi, Ev.
Hello.
Great to have you here. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to talk about Medium all night long, but I think the first thing that it would be helpful for us to talk about, even though I gave a little bit of an introduction on your background, is how you got to where you are, the path that you took that caused you to start Medium and to contribute to it the way you are. So why don't we start with you and just talk a little bit about these revolutionary services you've been a part of and how they brought you to Medium.
Sure. So it's been about, 18 years? What year is it? 16 years. It's been 16 years since I started Blogger. We launched in August 1999. And that was after I'd been working on the internet for a few years. And always what excited me about the internet more than anything else was getting access to other people's brains. It was tapping into knowledge. It was instant information at your fingertips, combined with the idea that I could share my own voice out there. And I'm a farm boy from Nebraska, so the idea of tapping into other people's brains around the world was such a compelling concept that we really take for granted now, but that's what got me first excited. And then that's what led to me working on Blogger, and really I dedicated about 6 years to that before selling it to Google and a couple at Google. But early on, I always thought, this revolutionary system that we now have is going to obviously make us all smarter and better. As individuals and as a society, we're going to make better decisions. The truth will be out there. Everything's going to be great. And then a few years ago, I thought, and most of my career I spent, well, let's just make it easier and easier to put your thoughts out there. More people put their thoughts out there. Sure, not all of them are going to be great or worthwhile, but in aggregate, it's going to do everybody a lot of good. And I still believe that was generally true, but it turned out just more information out there didn't make us all smarter and better necessarily. So Medium is just another attempt to fulfill that vision in many ways.
And Stephen, how about you?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a longtime journalist for traditional media. Things become traditional pretty quickly, like Rolling Stone is, a big media company, and of course Newsweek was an institution that I worked for a number of years, and then Wired, which is part of Condé Nast, a big company. And after a lot of years working for companies like that and covering companies like the ones Ev started, I thought, gee, maybe I should jump over to the other side. There were really exciting things going on in journalism from internet companies as opposed to media companies there. And Medium kept coming up more and more in my reading. I would see things in my Twitter stream and other places that pointed me to really interesting Medium articles, and I knew that there were some professional journalists working there. Wasn't quite sure how, but I thought, maybe it would be really interesting to start a technology, hub, some sort of publication, some sort of way to do technology journalism in a way that I didn't see being done there, and Medium would be the place to do that. So I approached Dev at TED last year, so that would have been, I guess, March a year ago, and just mentioned it to him, and he was quick to act. In an internet time, soon I was talking to him and another employee, and by the summer I was working for Medium.
Ev, I would love it if you would describe Medium to everybody in your own words. I sent a couple of attempts at this, I think, to Stephen early on, and he kept sending them back to me saying, well, no, that's not quite it. And then there was another one that was, that's not quite it either. So tell us what it is.
One way to think about Medium is it's a network that is designed to connect people's brains and really extract the useful things in someone's brain and get them where they will be into other brains where they will be appreciated and valued and useful. And so there's a piece of it that is about getting thoughts and stories out, and that's our chosen form for that is the written word. And so we started by building a nice way to write in your web browser. Anyone can access it. Anyone can go to Medium, say write a story, and just start typing. And then the network part is, once you hit publish, we want to get that to whoever's interested in it. And that doesn't sound terribly different than the internet or the web in general, but where the value comes from is in the last 15 years or so since we started Blogger, the concept was always, if you want to publish to the web, what you need to do is start with a website. And so you'll maybe choose a domain, and you'll choose some software, and some design, and then you'll put something on the web. And what blogs did for the first time is they made the idea that anyone can publish to the web practical, just because they made it easy enough to, and they created a form where, here's what native publishing on the web looks like. You type in a box, you hit a button, some text goes up at the top of a web page, and you come to that web page and you see the latest thing. Before that, there was not really a system or a standard for it. But blogs, which grew from being the personal publishing format to that of major media companies, all were standalone. Now, the web in general is a network, of course, but very loosely connected. So you would publish on a blog, and then you would hope that someone links to you. You'd hope you'd be found in Google eventually. Maybe you could email someone and tell them to come to your blog. But it was basically you publish, and then you wait. And then social media came along. And when we started with Twitter, the concept of following someone, as we know it today, that permeates all social media products, was kind of a new idea. It was taking a little bit from RSS, which was a blogging standard and allowed you to subscribe to a website. But we created this idea of follow, and at first we thought, is follow going to sound creepy? Do we really want to say you're following someone? And so, but we thought the real distinction we thought was that tweets were short. That was the difference between a blog and a tweet. Tweets are very short. You could write them on your phone. You could read them very quickly. So they were optimized for real-time communications. But the really powerful thing, besides that brevity, was the follow. And so that meant that you publish something the same way you did on a blog, but it instantly goes to those who have opted in to hear what you have to say. And so circle back to 2012, social media exists, Twitter exists, all these things are very well understood, and we understand that the things that really thrive and make the internet powerful is not software, it's networks. And there wasn't a network. There's a network for 140 characters, there's a network for photos, there's networks for videos, there's networks for friends and social attention and activity, but there wasn't actually a network for more substantive, bigger ideas and stories. And it seemed like the exact same principles were going to apply. And by publishing the type of things, be they long-form journalism or even a blog post type material, into a network, it could have the same effect that social media does in terms of reaching your right audience much, much more quickly. And if lots of people are publishing in the same network, then you could actually drive a lot more, essentially the whole would be greater than the sum of the parts. So it's the publishing tool, and then it's connecting all those people and those ideas together.
If I'm writing something for Medium,
And you don't?
and I don't yet, right, but I'm sure that's coming. Do I have the same issue that I have if I just open a Twitter account? I've got to get people. I've got to be interesting enough to get people to follow me, and the same thing would be true on Medium too,
I mean,
right?
you can't plug. There's no system, no matter how big it is, where you plug into and you instantly get attention. You have to earn the attention. And our goal with Medium also is explicitly we want to give the attention to where it's deserved. And this was one of the many problems we wanted to tackle when we looked at the web in general. The feedback systems on the web have always been, whether you're publishing commercially or not, the stats that you would get are number of people, unique visitors, and page views. That's basically what stats packages told you because they're designed mostly for advertising, and that's also what was really easy to measure in the beginning. And so for the history of the web, there was no distinction in terms of value or perception value between a 1-second view of a web page and a 10-minute read of an article that changed your mind about something. And so it's no surprise that in an advertising-driven web and a commercial web that we haven't seen deeper and richer and more valuable and more substantive content. We've seen the opposite generally. And so you do have the same problem, but what you optimize for, hopefully in our dream medium, which we're not there yet, it's early days, you hit that button and it finds its way to exactly its right audience. Not necessarily a large audience, could be large, could be small, but it will find its way to a right audience based on interest in you, based on interest in the topic, and based on other people's reactions to it.
So rather than having to attract people to follow me, your algorithm takes what I've written, looks for communities of interest or a network of interest out there, and just distributes it out
It's
there.
very simple right now. There's a follow mechanism similar to Twitter, and when you sign up for Medium, we will utilize the connections you have on Twitter or Facebook if they're on Medium, and that will give you a start. And then it's topic based, and then you can go to Facebook or Twitter and share the piece, and it can get its own momentum within Medium. Today, if I publish something on Medium via just the attention driven via Medium is far greater than I can drive via Twitter with over 1 million followers over there. So the system works, but when you just start, you don't necessarily have all those connections.
Yeah, you're just plugged into the network.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to you, Stephen, about your experience starting Backchannel and how you've experienced this whole network effect. But before I do that, I'd like for you both to comment on something that Ev touched on a second ago, which is what Ev has talked about pretty often, about the declining quality of traditional media and how Medium is trying to provide an answer to that. Can you just both, let me start with you, Stephen, just talk a little bit about the problem in that area that Medium's trying to solve.
Well, that's one reason I wanted to try something different there. It was happening in tech journalism, and I think journalism in general is because of that model that Ev described, where people are addicted to the page view. You get these articles that are called clickbait, and people write misleading headlines, anything to lure you to a story. And also the business model of places like Wired, where I was, is that they were one of many places in technology news that felt they had to cover everything, right? So not only when there's a big Apple event where they do like 20 or 30 or 50 stories on every aspect of it, whether people's shirts are tucked in or not. There's, I think the last event, the Apple thing, there was probably like 100 articles, like talking about whose shirt was tucked on in the speakers in the Apple event or not. Tim Cook, shirt tucked out, someone else had the shirt tucked in, they were keeping tallies.
Was purple the new color of the shirt to wear at Apple? Yeah,
every
I read
aspect.
that, yeah.
But also, I mean, the kid who got arrested for building a clock to school, right? What a huge story that was, right? But everyone had to write about it, whether they had a unique angle or not. Everyone has to weigh in on everything, and they have people working in there writing 3 or 4 or 5 stories a day. Sometimes the source material for a story is someone else's story. That's not uncommon at all. And I felt, gee, with Medium, I have an opportunity here to write something where everything we do will be something you can't read anywhere else on the internet there. And what the extra twist of being on Medium, which is this network, is that there was people writing all sorts of stuff, some of it interesting, some of it not interesting, but quite often people who were really knowledgeable writing about my field, technology. And from the very first day, in the first collection of articles I did, I picked something that was, user-generated content, we call it, just stuff from native Medium, and we gave it a re-edit. We hired an illustrator to do the pictures on there, but it's one of our most popular stories there. So you could experiment with making the membrane between professional journalists and really good writers who aren't professionals, who are just writing out of passion, make that membrane a little more porous. And that was something I wanted to do that really fit in with Medium there. And we're still doing experiments and seeing, besides the traditional journalism I do, I'm always going to chase a big story and kind of go after an exclusive there, but also to see how far I can go in doing something new, since I'm part of this amazing network where people are contributing and doing interesting things that could be part of what I'm doing.
I like that phrase, making the membrane more porous. I think that, and as a Medium user, I really like the way that the whole system works in that way. It really seems to be clicking in that way. Let me hear from you, Ev, about this decline in traditional media.
Oh, well, I agree with everything Stephen said, and there's clickbait on one end of the spectrum, but even respected publications, the game has become, you have to have volume. And if you don't have a lot of volume, then you're not fresh enough to get people in the habit of coming to your site. And there's only a few sites that can get people in that habit, or a few sites that people will habitually go to. So there's really this volume game. So it's very important that you're always publishing, and of course you have things that people click on. And so with Medium, one of the levers against that is simply the fact that there's enough aggregate stuff that people will come to the site or the app on a regular basis, and therefore when you have something worthwhile, whether you're a journalist who's going to work on a story for 2 or 3 months, or an individual who, and the same applies at different levels. If you're an individual, there's a big difference between occasionally having a story to tell or wanting to opine on your Apple Watch you just got once or twice a year and feeling, well, there's no point in doing that because if I blog, then I have to build an audience and I have to be regular and committed. The same idea applies. If the system is alive and the network's there and you can insert something in that system at any time and not worry about, oh, I have to keep the plate spinning or else it falls, then you can focus on, I'm going to say something when there's something worthwhile to say. And so that makes a big difference. But then the other thing is just what is measured. So one of the things so we talked about how if you optimize for unique page views or unique visitors and page views, and it makes no difference if people actually read something, or it also doesn't make any difference who all page views or all visitors are anonymous pretty much, then you're going to spend time on different things. And the internet as a whole is ordered reverse chronologically. So the new thing goes in at the top, it very quickly disappears, it's hard to get found. And so all these things affect what it makes sense. It's all about reward systems and feedback mechanisms, even if you're not doing it for money, but especially if you have to pay the bills. And so what we've tried to do from the beginning, and we haven't necessarily figured this all out yet, is just measure different things. So one of the things we've started measuring from the beginning is sort of a top line proxy for value is the amount of time people spend reading rather than the amount of page views. And it's imperfect because time doesn't necessarily, it's a cost that we're extracting, but with infinite things to grab your attention, if someone's actually spending time reading something, that's an indicator at least that they're finding value from it. And then we reward things that people are spending time on rather than rewarding that someone just clicked on the page.
How do you reward that?
Meaning giving it more distribution.
Ah, okay. So the writer actually benefits by being someone whose content is attracting
Right.
more time spent.
Yeah. More time spent, as well as our action that is called a recommend, which is like our like, but it's intentionally saying this is good, and that's the signal to the system and to your social network on Medium that here's something worthwhile, and it will have more tendency then to bubble up. There's no reward for just having a lot of people visit the page. In fact, when we've had, since anyone can show up and write anything on Medium, we've had posts that have gone highly viral on Facebook, for instance, that haven't really risen to the top of the charts on Medium because even though they have the most visits, but they don't necessarily reflect what the Medium reader base considers
Isn't that
quality.
interesting? So what do you make of that? Is it a kind of self-selecting process if people are spending a lot of time on certain things?
Well, it's interesting to see when you do that, and you see that the stats of the story, that some things will not have that big a readership, but will have a very high recommend level there.
Right.
So it's having an impact with people. Then people aren't clicking and going away. And as a matter of fact, there's a very low bounce rate, which means people look at it and say, "Oh, I didn't mean to come here," and they leave. The very low bounce rate on the stuff we do. At least the stuff I've been trying to do and the stuff that our editorial group does, because we don't mislead people in coming there. And if you have these ways that you could draw people there, whether it's through a tag that people are interested in, or they might follow the author, they might follow the publication that the article, the post appears in. By and large, when people go somewhere, they're going to be interested in what's there.
Yeah.
And there's another aspect of this that we think about, and we can't measure as well now, but Stephen is a perfect example of when he writes an article in the tech industry, reads it, it's influencers and leaders, and so who these people are matters depending on your purpose. I mean, definitely matters to an advertiser, but it matters for most people who write non-commercially as well. When I write something, I want to affect how people think, and therefore it matters a great deal who that actual audience is. So the three dimensions of breadth, depth, how much time, and who those actual people are is the way we think about quality and value. And the web historically is just, it's measured one dimension. And so anything you measure one dimension, you don't have a complete picture, and you start distorting things to only optimize for that dimension.
In this area of measuring things, so you measure who's looking at the articles.
That's the part we don't really have a way to measure.
Don't have it,
today.
okay.
Yeah,
I
it's
was just
more
thinking-
qualitative, but Stephen, you want to comment on what your sense of that is?
Well, I mean, look, you get a sense of the impact of the article and sort of who's recommending it out there. There's sites like Jason Hirschhorn's site and TechMeme and things like that. We make an impact there, and just it's interesting when you go to a new place. When I left Newsweek and went to Wired, the question was, gee, are people going to give me the same exclusives there, right? And,
Yeah.
that was okay. And then, okay, well, I'm leaving Wired, which is a big established place, and going to this place called Medium. People still going to think I'll be able to reach the audience they want to read, and I'm getting exclusives. They're still giving me giving me a chance to write about some of the big stories that they don't give they give to me in favor of other journalists from big publications who are vying for the same stories.
I think that may be because you're so good at it when you write about it, Steve, and that may have something to do with it too.
At any time, a company, they're self-interested there. So, they're not just looking just at me. It's, the combination of the writer and the publication there.
Yeah.
If I was saying I'm just going to write it for my own blog and things like that, I don't think I would get those exclusives there.
I see. Before we leave this area of quality, which I realize is very subjective, I'm just wondering, Ev, when you started Blogger and you started actually reading some of the things that were being written, and you maybe flashed ahead thinking about something like Medium, did you say to yourself, wow, a lot of this stuff is a lot more interesting than the other stuff I'm getting from WashingtonPost.com or CNN.com or whatever? Did you have that feeling?
Absolutely, and that's why I was really convinced early on about the power of individual stories and ideas, and especially when you look at the written word, because there are millions of people who are not professionals and writers, and they don't do the work that a journalist does. But if it's something they know and have personal experience in, they can tell a compelling story, and they can tell a valuable story and offer a perspective that you can't get anywhere else. And so when it comes to tech journalism, in general, if I'm reading about my industry, there's stories from entrepreneurs, there's stories from engineers, there's stories from designers, there's stories from VCs, are 9 times out of 10 better than the stories in some tech blog that's trying to talk about those people, because those people actually know what they're talking about. And so we've seen that since the beginning of blogs, and of course, and that's what we're seeing with Medium as well. And what we're seeing now is this mix. So you can have a journalist tell a story and incorporate a bunch of perspective and actually do the work of reporting. And then you can have someone come in and weigh in on the same level, and maybe they have a contrary viewpoint, maybe they complement it, but they can offer their personal story, and it deepens your understanding of the whole topic.
Yeah.
And then a conversation ensues. We really haven't talked about the way that people can respond to it. And in the responses, they could be as short or as long as they like. The responses can telescope out into basically you're writing a post in answer to that. And what I'm impressed with, I remember when we first started getting comments in our things when we went digital as journalists, and we thought, wow, we're going to get great interactions with the readers there. But you look at the comments on a newspaper, and it gets horrendous. It's quite often vile what people say. And I'm constantly impressed at the high level. And I'm not still quite understand. I know a few things why it is, but it's still impressive to me how the high quality of the responses and how rare it is to have people trolling or just coming at you. Maybe because you are signed in, but it's even more than that. There's quite often really amazing discussions take place that are triggered by some of these posts.
Let's talk about Backchannel, which is a kind of an innovation within the innovation of Medium. Why don't you just take a shot, Stephen, at telling us what Backchannel is? And you get the benefit of the long pause that Ev was able to take, too, when he was answering the question about Medium. So
okay, well,
go ahead.
All right.
He doesn't need the long pause.
Okay, enough of a pause. Well, what I wanted to do, because, again, I'm not going to go into this volume thing. It was always sort of a guerrilla operation on this platform that was optimized to bring this about. But to do something what I called muffin top journalism there. Now, if you're Seinfeld fans, you remember the episode where Elaine, was going on about how tasty the tops of muffins were, but the bottom of muffins weren't so tasty. So she would open a store that just sold the tops of muffins there, right? And it would be delicious. Then there was a subplot that they couldn't get rid of the bottoms of muffins and things like that. But I thought instead of doing the whole thing, covering everything in journalism, I would only do the muffin tops, only the good stuff. right? So we wouldn't do a lot of stories, but every story we did, our competition would be maybe the best story you'd read in the tech section in the New York Times or on Recode or one of those places. And then again, we would have it by featuring people who were in media, people in the community to go on there. But that anything that appeared there on Backchannel, you knew was something you wouldn't be reading somewhere else on the internet. If we did the same story as someone else, that wasn't a good day for us then.
Yeah.
And so when I feel that I'm doing that is when maybe there's an event across town where there's 20 journalists, sitting there and watching someone talk and taking notes and live blogging or things like that. But I'm across town covering something where I'm the only journalist and writing a story that I might go in a deeper dive on something like that. So that's the kind of story I really like to read. That's the kind of story when one of my peers does, I figure, boy, I wish I had that. And that's the kind of thing I like to do in Backchannel.
Now, how did you find each other? I mean, we've got one of the most disruptive people on the internet, one of the top writers in technology. What brought the two of you together?
Well, I've known Ev for a long time. As a matter of fact, just to shake him up here, before we walked out here, I was going through my desk drawer the other day, and I found this card, Ev's business card from Blogger. It says amphetamines for your website. Do we still use that? Yeah, and
we should bring it back.
Yeah, so I've been following Ev's career since Blogger, and I remember I talked to you at Odeo,
Yep.
And of course Twitter, and so look, he's one of the great entrepreneurs of Silicon Valley, and the other thing I wanted to do besides do the kind of journalism I thought you could do it at a place where you started up was to work for an internet company. That's a totally different experience. And that, to me, was a more subtle transition than starting something like that. In journalism, the people are sort of, just driven to come out and write the best stories and, come up with that. And, there's competition everywhere. And a newspaper and a magazine succeeds when the individual journalists succeed there, right, and win a prize and bring in the scoop. But working for a small internet company, there's something else going on, which I'm really glad I had the experience of. I'm not just writing for myself or even bringing in writers to do it. I'm part of this team, the startup. And it's really exciting to work in there and see there's plenty of ups and downs in a startup too, but to work there with a leader who's certainly been there before and get to experience that, to actually be in the room at the time when, as a journalist, when I visit a company, they'd send me on my way and interesting things would happen that journalists couldn't be in the room for.
Was it important for you to attract someone like Stephen early on?
Well, early on we had this idea that we're building a platform. We're not trying to become a publisher primarily ourselves. We want to make Medium the default place to write anything important for anyone. But my belief and experience told me that the norms of a site or a platform are as important as the functionality when it comes to defining what actually happens there, as well as the fact that as a network, it has to get critical mass. So instead of just opening the doors and saying, all right, there's a place to write on the internet now, which people might not have reacted to.
And there were a few already.
Yeah, there were a few already. We said, well, let's define what goes on here. So I hired this woman named Kate Lee in New York, and who had been a book agent, and we gave her a very small budget to just go out and do what she could to set the norms and get good stuff started being published on the platform, even before we opened the doors wide open to everyone. So we had that idea, and then it was, so we were doing some of that at a small scale, and then it was really somewhat opportunistic that Stephen happened to be thinking about what's next, and so when he started talking to me at TED, I was immediately like, this makes all kinds of sense, because also, I mean, Stephen definitely was the only Stephen we have or had, but the idea that it's also about building critical mass in a community, and obviously we were strong because of our origins in Silicon Valley and tech anyway. So I thought it makes sense to double down there, get an anchor name and a series of stories that are going to make Medium a must-read, which would also make it, for that community, the must-write place. So that was kind of the big idea, and we were just super lucky that I think there was actually a post someone found internally from me early on describing the strategy in which I named Stephen Levy before we were talking to Stephen Levy.
I still remember the day I opened the story, the big headline, I'm moving to Medium. Did your friends in the business write to you and say, what are you doing? What is this thing? And have you lost your mind?
Well, in California, they say, what takes you so long? And in New York, they say, what's good? What are you doing?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Now, I want to just have you elaborate a bit now, Stephen, on your experience within Backchannel, within this network, both writing, attracting writers, attracting readers, watching the whole thing work. What's it been like?
It's been, it's been amazing. I mean, that people know about Medium in the community, and they're interested in it. One thing we haven't talked a lot about is, it just looks good. And
It does. It's a really well-designed publication. I'll call it that. I just think it looks fantastic.
And it has a distinctive look. And it's interesting. I remember I once wrote an article for the New Yorker, and after looking at it for the whole time, things. And when you write for the New Yorker, you think, I'll just write the article the way I write it. But you just keep thinking of that font and the way it looks on the page, and you sort of like right up to it, right? And I think the same thing happens with Medium when people come there. They think, okay, I'm going to, do good stuff here because this is going to look good. So it's been interesting to bring in writers. We hired a great executive editor for Backchannel, Sandra Upson, and she's helped me out a lot and freed me to do more writing. And recently, we sort of reorganized our editorial team so more people can be involved in Backchannel, and I could be involved in some of the other publications and projects. Maybe we'll talk about some projects that is going on there. But it's been a lot of fun, and I like being an editor as well as a writer. So I've enjoyed bringing in people. We have this one writer who does a column, Susan Crawford, who's a real expert on issues of connectivity and broadband. And she's written books, and she does a column for us. Another writer that we use regularly is Scott Rosenberg,
Yes.
who is probably the best writer to write about the people who write code. And he's done some amazing articles for us about things like the companies like Apple and Facebook doing their own computer languages. And he did one recently on a startup, which is the Twitch of coding. You turn on the screen, you watch people code, which you think could be deadly, but people like to do that.
Yeah, I do want to talk about some projects, maybe not the Twitch of code, but and you've got your favorites, but the one that I wanted to at least start with is this Apple Watch,
Right.
long-running thing you've been doing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as I talked before, one thing I like to do is try to experiment on uses of the network there. So the Apple Watch came out, and as you'd expect, the reviewers reviewed it, right? And that day, the reviews, the embargo lifted. There was like about 100 reviews, and some of them were, many pages long, and some of them were shorter, and these are professional reviewers. They all did a great job. But I noticed that a lot of people on Medium, as they got their Apple Watches, wanted to share their experiences with them and their thoughts about it. So I thought maybe we could do something with all that to bring them together. So we started actually a separate little mini publication called the Apple Watch Project. I invited those people to submit their posts to this little publication we started there, and people could recommend it. We have this feature called highlighting, where people can very easily highlight a passage they like in a post and maybe tweet it out to the world. And we watched what people did, and they recommended there. And after a certain period of time, we took these posts and edited the best passages to make one long review that read like one single person wrote it. And we have some great design people there. So we figured out there was this little emoji thing that looked like an Apple Watch, and that appeared within the text. And whenever emoji appeared, it was like a different person would start talking, right? And yeah, and on the side you could see who talked. And we had pictures of the people there. So it was like a 2,000-word review of the Apple Watch, which I really contend was as good as any review you do. Take that, Walt Mossberg, right? And written by the Medium community there.
Yeah.
And you could look at it at Medium.
Yeah. When you saw something like that happen on Medium, were you happy?
I love
saying,
it.
Yeah, this is the thing we're trying to do.
Exactly. It's exactly in the spirit of what we're trying to do, and it was a great project, and it would have never occurred to me to do exactly that, but is this idea of the whole becoming greater than the sum of the parts. If you're open and you have the ability for everybody to put in their thoughts, then good things can happen. And if we really build a system where everybody can have a voice and it gets the attention it deserves, then we can do super interesting things. I mean, that was a really cool experiment, and maybe we make that type of thing easier to do. But you can go on Medium and look at any topic under the sun, and you can find the best commentary about that from anyone. And if you write something that is valuable, and it will bubble up. And so I got really excited about that, and a lot of the other, we're just scratching the surface on how we mix this stuff together, and we're learning, and so this sort of experiment is great.
You've used this great phrase, the network value of qualitative feedback. Is that what you have in mind,
Yeah.
this sort of experimentation like this?
Yeah, what I mean by that is there's two forms, well, at least two forms of the value of the network. So we've talked about distribution.
Yes.
You put something in and it finds its audience. That is, in many ways, the most primitive value that the network offers. The next value is the qualitative feedback. So Stephen mentioned highlights. When you're reading something on Medium and you are connected to other people, and then you can see what they thought about something you're reading. And so I could be reading an article of Stephen's, and if I follow you and you've highlighted something while I'm reading in the article, instead of you just sending me there from a tweet, I'm seeing the article and there's a sentence and it has a highlight and it has your name next to it. And if I know you, or even if I don't know you, but I respect your opinion, that immediately makes what I'm reading more meaningful. It gives us something potentially to talk about. It focuses my attention. And you multiply that and you say everybody is like getting handed the New York Times. Actually, before we started Medium, I always thought, I want to read the New York Times after Bill Gates and 10 of the smartest people I know have read it and written on the margins and highlighted. And that's, why isn't that possible? Mm-hmm. And why hasn't the internet done this? And it's just one of many things that the internet hasn't really changed enough things about reading and how we get information. It hasn't tapped into this value of other people's brains in a really integrated way. And so just this little notion of the highlight, and if you read on Kindle, you get a little glimpse of it. Mm-hmm. You say, this is a popular highlight. Way more interesting than that is one person and you see their name. And then as a writer, it's way more exciting too, because instead of Stephen hearing that you liked his article, like, well, maybe you were just trying to be nice. You said this bit right here resonated, and then you can go on and you can actually write your own whole response or a comment or an annotation based on that. So that's what I mean by the qualitative feedback.
Yeah.
As a writer, sometimes you'll have a line you really like, and it's in your story there, and you'll never know whether it's connected with people. But it's so cool when you put in your little joke or line like that, and then people highlight it. Oh, they got it. That's great.
Yeah. Do you feel like is that just a moment of a more special connection between you and a reader than you could get in anything else you've done up to this point?
Well, of course, because normally, people, like you say, we'll give you, oh, that was a good article, or you could, other people, you can see people are discussing it. But even if people are talking about your article, they're tweeting it or things like that, very rarely will they pull, your favorite line from it.
Let's talk about another couple of projects that you're working on that you really are, maybe it's something you finished, or maybe it's something you're just kind of dreaming up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like, one thing that I wanted to experiment on is, to break things up into parts to see how that works there. We did a book excerpt from Dr. Robert Wachter, who did an amazing book called The Digital Doctor. And he had this long set piece about a patient in a hospital who'd been given a massive overdose of a drug because the way technology works in hospitals, no one could stop it. No one could figure out, keep track of it in a global sense there. And, get involved, like the nurse and the system and the pharmacist and the robots that pack the drugs and all sorts of things there. So we broke that up and did it into 5 parts, almost like serial. And that worked out really well. And my colleagues, part of our editorial team does this publication called Matter, which is sort of amazing publication, does ambitious things. Recently, they did a big climate package there that was anchored by a long piece by Margaret Atwood about, what happens when we use up all the oil. And they, along with that, they assigned a lot of pieces on, cli-fi, which is science, the equivalent of science fiction, but it's about the climate there. So, and that was a big ambitious package of a lot of pieces there that got a lot of great responses.
What's been the biggest surprise for either of you in this whole journey up to this point? What is the thing you've experienced that maybe has shocked you, or maybe even just said, yeah, actually that I could see that happening, but I didn't expect it?
It was surprising when the White House called and said they're going to put the State of the Union on Medium at the same time they sent it to press, which had never been done before. And they had this realization that for years it was always the norm to send the script to the press first, and it was embargoed, and then everybody in DC basically got a copy because it was forwarded around, and realized, well, everybody should get a copy, and so they can follow along. So they let us know about 48 hours ahead of time, and our team worked with them to make sure it looked great, and they published it. And that was an amazing and surprising incident, especially because that was quite a while ago now in the history of Medium. And
gosh, yeah, that was 8 months ago.
Yeah.
That's like an eternity, isn't it?
yeah, it's true.
And how about for you, Stephen?
I guess some of the surprising effects you get, just the way the network works. It's normally in journalism, you get a big rush when a story comes out, and then it fades there. But things on Medium seem to have a long tail. Maybe the way, just because it is a network and things percolate and come back and forth there. And also the way things work is usually you get your most attention the day after something's published, because we send an email out every morning to people and tell you, here's the stuff that you might be interested in on Medium, things you follow and things like that. So even though we sometimes very dutifully tweet and put on Facebook what we publish there, the big push comes when it comes in the Medium network the next day, and the people who are really interested in it, who are on Medium, as you all should be, I hope, and will be by the end of the night, in case you're not, to keep that going. And sometimes it's fun to do a story. One thing that I wanted to bring to Backchannel was the idea, so many times in meetings I would pitch something and that I thought was a really interesting story, and they'd say, well, what's the news peg? Is there a news peg? Is there something happening there? And I thought, well, if something's really interesting, can't we just write about it? And the answer was usually no. But for here, since I could assign myself stories, the answer was yes. And one story I really loved doing, for instance, was about this guy who is not too far from here on San Antonio Road, who is like the inventor of this amazing device called the AeroPress. This $30 device that makes an amazing cup of coffee. He's the same guy who invented the Aerobie. And he's like this backyard inventor. He's 78 years old. I interviewed him, and it was wildly popular and still is. People keep rediscovering that story.
And a lot of that is by design, because when we started out, we didn't design Medium for news. And Twitter's about news in my mind, but Medium, I think it's one of the things we're trying to address is if you added up all the time people spend reading, especially on the internet, a huge proportion of it is news. And it's hard to argue against news because we want to be informed citizens. But the truth is the vast majority of news is not useful or valuable. And so it's odd to me, and I think about my own consumption habits before Medium, that I just need to know what's new. Like that's just the goal with so much of this stuff versus what's valuable, what's actually useful for me, what helps me, what is going to move me, what is going to make me wiser about the world. And so by designing a place that neither optimizes for just the new stuff, and you always have to just feed that hunger, and we can allow what's actually interesting and what's valuable to propagate. And I think what we're seeing from our readers is this kind of a collective sigh of relief when you can go to Medium and there's endless ideas and content and stories, but it gives you a different feeling than reading the news. You can get lost in Medium and you don't regret it.
Just so you don't regret it. I like that. Just so people will know, I read last night, Evan, something you said recently, which is, and I think maybe just a couple of weeks ago, you've had 300,000 people publish on the service so far. That's a big number. Is that where you thought you'd be? Are you happy with that? Is that not as many? How's that?
Well, it's certainly tiny compared to what it will be. So, I mean, when we created the system, we knew it's not like Twitter. It's not a social network, and it's not for everybody to create. It was a very different motivation than Blogger or Twitter for me, which were really about let's lower the barrier to people putting their thoughts out in the world. That was the thing that the internet promised that we, along with lots of other people, worked on to make true. At the beginning of Medium, that was true. We no longer needed to lower that barrier. It's amazing that's true, and so we're not going to try to make it as easy as possible, and we're not going to focus on things on just everybody should be putting stuff out there. It will be the type of thing that a very, very small percentage of people will take the time or have the inclination to even put a couple paragraphs down that they're going to share with the world. I think that number, by the way, is way bigger than many people think, and it's also way bigger than the people who have ever started blogging, which is tens of millions of people, because it doesn't have to be, I'm a publisher and I'm going to build an audience. It's just, do you have something to say? And I think that number is very large, and we're barely scratching the surface. So the number of readers is many millions, many times the number of writers, but I think the potential for a number of writers is greater than, my hope is we see way more people writing, and we're really speaking to, in many ways, the spirit of the early web, where we did have this idea that everybody had something to say, and everyone had a valuable perspective to share now and then. And the social media is, in theory, sort of that way, because many more people share, but they share they share little things. They don't actually, their job is more to share something from a comment at best, or a photo, or hey, here's an article, not here's actually my thoughts on something that matter. Mm. And so we want to tap, I think, if we can tap that energy and that inclination, which I think is in many more people's hearts and minds than we get out of them, then we'll have a better world. Mm.
It's kind of interesting because you look at now the big companies in social media, and they're bringing in more and more professional content from partners into what they do. So if I want to tell people about my vacation on Facebook, I'm competing with all these stories they're doing from showing instantly from the New York Times and other places, and as well as all this bogus viral content that's out there. So all these places now are trying to join that parade of news there in their streams. So maybe they'll folks will retreat when they have something to say to Medium.
One follow-up question along those lines, and then we'll get to some audience questions. I downloaded the new Apple operating system on my phone today. There's the new news icon right there on the front page of my phone. Facebook is getting into news. Why is everybody in this kind of company getting into news, and how does that affect your thinking about what you're doing?
Well, the reason that's happening is because part of the same insight that led us to build Medium, which is the inevitable trend towards centralization. And so what they're just responding to is speed and convenience for people, for users. It's just more with Facebook, instant articles, which they announced a while back, and Apple News, and other apps like Flipboards, is basically saying we can package and aggregate news. It's a very popular activity, checking the news. People are already doing that on their phones. Let's make it faster. Let's make it more convenient. And by the way, there could be a great business if we aggregate all that attention. So I think that's inevitable, and we saw the same thing coming when we started Medium, and just the idea that people are going to get the vast majority of their media from apps on their phones, and they're not going to go to tens or hundreds of websites. They're going to go to that which aggregates.
Okay. I love it when we get questions like this. This one's for you, Stephen. As a student journalist, do you have any advice for a student considering working in the field of journalism? How do you sort this all out today if you're trying to be a journalist?
Well, I'm not a student journalist, so
First
I would correct the writer. Actually, I think for a student journalist, it's a great time there. I think this is, a few years ago, there was a lot of doom and gloom in the journalism business. But now there's amazing opportunities as people try to invent the next iteration of news. And there are so many new companies coming out trying to do that, from startups to things spun off from traditional media companies there. So the opportunities are wide.
And it's the same old blocking and tackling, isn't it? Learn to think, learn how to write, learn grammar, be good at writing and expressing ideas, and then take it from there?
Well, absolutely. I think really what you have to do is what I was saying before, is try to focus on stories which are unique and compelling. There, the stories, that I look for when I'm thinking, gee, is there someone we could assign a story to for Backchannel or Matter or one of our projects? There's plenty of stories I see by young journalists I never heard of, and saying, wow, that's really interesting. This person really dove in there and took time, sometimes from her normal job of writing 5 stories a day, but worked nights and weekends to come up with something like long and deep. And that's impressive there. And I think you could make a splash by coming up with something that doesn't just gloss over something and go on to the next story.
Ev, here's a really good one for you. Do you think Medium's model can work in any part of the world, or could it only work in the circumstance of the US, but let's say perhaps not in India or China, where it seems like things you've invented, like Blogger and Twitter, have been blocked or censored or suppressed in some way?
Yeah, generally everything I've built is focused on freedom of expression, and that hasn't gone over as well in some parts of the world as it has here. India, for the most part, has not been as bad as China and some parts of the Middle East. And Medium's no exception to that. I mean, we're not blocked anywhere now. By pointing out that we're not blocked, I'm sure that helps. But I think in general it'll work, and Twitter has users in China. They have to go to more and more great lengths to use it, and we'll probably I don't see any reason why Medium won't have similar challenges, but hopefully we can reach people in most of the world.
Stephen, what shocked you the most about working for a startup? Shocked. I think shocked is the word we're looking for here.
Shocked. I don't know if any, I was like shocked. I've seen journalists before. I had to go on a diet because the free food was so proliferate. So
A great journalistic tradition.
yeah,
free food,
yeah. Well, actually, journalism doesn't have, you have to go out to get free food. So this is like a big difference. Normally, you would like attend all these industry events because they fed you. Now I could stay in the office and get fed.
And we didn't talk much about the business model for Medium, and sure enough, here's a question from the audience. What is the business model? And then there are a couple of specific questions. Will authors get paid? And who pays for the servers needed to support the service?
Sure. So right now, we make a little bit of money by working with brands who publish on Medium, and we've done mostly on an experimental basis a few really high quality and interesting projects where we've worked with BMW and Marriott and Samsung and Intel and others to help them publish content or sponsor content. Some of it's run in Backchannel, and that's been fairly successful, but small scale. And what we see happening is that it's right now who pays for it. We're a venture capital funded startup, so to answer that, but and we're not profitable. But what we think there's a very big business here in a couple different ways. One is that every major content platform on the internet has a robust advertising business. We think Medium is a platform for influence and storytelling, and that's really what marketing and advertising is. So we think that will probably make a lot of sense, and we're having success there, as I mentioned, with those brands. It's a very different type of content and environment than you will find in most places on the internet, and a lot of brands that want to tell more substantive stories are finding that very attractive. And so we'll be building that out and seeing where that goes in the natural order, and to the extent that that is being driven by writers or publishers on Medium, and there are many commercial publishers who are starting or moving to Medium. Obviously, we would want them to be rewarded for that effort. I also think different content makes sense to monetize in different ways, and there's a tremendous opportunity, I think, in content people will pay for, and which hasn't been very efficient to do. It's been very hard since the beginning of the web to put something out and say, pay money for this, just because there's a lot of friction. On the web, you have to sign up and fill out lots of forms and enter credit cards, and with infinite information available at your fingertips, it's hard to get people to do that, although numerous businesses have been built along those lines. So we could see doing something like that and building it in, and just giving whoever's publishing it the option.
Stephen, do you have a strong feeling about this kind of new world order in which paid sponsors like BMW and Intel publish right alongside journalists who have never perhaps experienced that world before?
Well, and we've done a couple things, as I've said, in Intel and Samsung. We've been pretty rigorous, in this experimental stage of saying that, if these native, stories, native advertising stories appear in our publications, ideally they should be as high quality as the stories in the publications. Of course, with my stories, that's impossible. But a joke. But we actually done a pretty good job at the response to some of the stories. So when Samsung was publishing, they weren't publishing articles about Samsung phones, but they had a bunch of influential people talking about, gee, what was the thing that moved me in my life, a pivotal moment in my life. So we had people like Jessica Livingston or Harper Reed, The guy did Obama's website talking about things, and we made them look beautiful, and they got a good response. And doing that frees us from having to put ads on the pages that our stuff is on. It's quite often you go to some websites, you go there, the first thing is like things pop up in your face saying click on me, and then like a couple places after every paragraph they'll say, want to know more about this, go here, and as a writer and say, wait a minute, I don't want someone after every paragraph saying go somewhere else. Right. So I really like it that I could write sometimes a long form story on Medium. People don't have to go to the next page because we're trying to jack up the page views. They just kind of keep scrolling and the thing unrolls, and we actually give them a little break on the top of the story by telling them how long it's going to take to read the story. So they don't have to get in the position like, oh man, is the story going to keep going there? We warn them in advance.
Yeah. And by the way, when we talk about advertising, it's definitely not the advertising you're used to on the web. It's not invasive and it's not distracting. It's stories, it's native, and that's one of the things you can do, especially as a platform. We have many companies publish on Medium as their main outlet or as their corporate blog. So it's commercial publishing, just like we saw with Twitter very early on, and we turned that into a business with Twitter because the same tool that's used by the individuals and the journalists is used by the brands to tell their message as well.
Yeah, and we, of course, label the stories that are
Sure.
sponsored.
It's kind of like a special section, perhaps, in a newspaper. Is that a good analogy where you clearly understand this is something
When it's within a
different
publication, yeah.
So there, you mentioned the story about the State of the Union, which I think is a very, very cool story. And here's an audience question that's kind of a follow-up. If Medium's focus is about participatory and democratic engagement, what could Medium's potential role be in the 2016 presidential election? Have you thought about that?
We have thought about that a lot. We have an effort to do a lot around the election. Most of the campaigns are on Medium, publishing regularly. On the way here, I just saw a post from Jeb Bush, and I don't think we have Trump yet. We'll work on that. And what we're trying to do, I'm pretty excited about because we're getting the campaigns to make state their messages and platforms on Medium, and it's in this open forum, and anyone can respond to them. At contradictory or complementary, there can be, as we talked about earlier, with these in context highlights and responses. You can see what people you care about think. They could be fact-checked right on the page, which you can't do on their website. And we hope to get a robust amount of engagement and activity and discussion happening in a meaty way that doesn't happen anywhere else. And there's just nothing else set up to do that because all you have is you have media outlets. So a journalist is telling the story, and so not everybody can have a say. It's edited, or you have individual websites where one person's having to say here and one person's having to say over here, or you have social media where there is discussion and debate, but it's in very limited form. So we think we can offer something really unique in terms of discourse that is meaningful, and we're starting to see it right now in pretty exciting ways.
We haven't had a chance to show people what it actually looks like, and it is beautiful. And I just wanted to ask this question about the considerations that you took into account to make it so legible and to make the design so fresh and crisp.
Sure. So we have an amazing design team, but the intention from the beginning was really user-focused, and we know a bunch of stuff. The web in general has degraded over time because of the advertising model. And then the needs for what the web looked like and felt like changed when it came to mobile. And so we designed Medium at a time where we weren't going to be reliant on ads or in-page ads, and that we were from the beginning going to design for mobile, so it's going to look good on the small screen. We happened to also started at a time when, for the first time, there's really good typography that you can incorporate into the web and into apps that didn't used to be available. So really, we wanted to focus on the content, and that was the incentive from the beginning, and the ideas and the functionality and making it really obvious, and then we just have a great design team that took that and just know how to do beautiful and useful things.
We have so many great questions from the audience, and I'm going to ask one final one here, and then I'm going to ask one of my own to close. This is a question we really love because we're in the preservation game. How are you going to keep content around for 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 years? We've stumped the panel.
Well, obviously we're going to succeed, so we're not going to go away.
Right.
So we'll never have to worry about what happens to the Medium archive.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think an important one, because we're asking people to invest and be the home for their stories. And from people who have published on the web for a long time, I think that's a question, because many services have closed, and usually they say, they give a warning and say, okay, here's your stuff, take it if they happen to go out of business. And we've done that from the very beginning. We've allowed you to download all your content you may need but we have no intention of going away, of course. So we should work on a more concrete answer to that that's not only dependent on our survival. Maybe we could go talk with you, and you can make a backup.
Let's
put it here in the museum.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that.
We did a deal with the Library of Congress at Twitter, where we gave them an entire archive of all the tweets for historical purposes.
All the tweets.
All the tweets at that point in time, anyway.
Yeah,
They don't still go.
All the public
Is
tweets.
it all going?
Probably.
that's fantastic. We're talking about things lasting and things going away. I want to ask you one final question about print journalism and the future of it. I read the other day that it would now be cheaper for the New York Times to just buy every print subscriber a Kindle and do away with the print publication. What do you think is going to happen to print publications, mainstream print, in the future? And should we be worried about it if your answer is they're not going to make it?
If the New York Times did that, and spent all their money buying people Kindles, they would go out of business pretty quickly, because their business model still, depends on the ads in the paper version there. And it's interesting. I think we're seeing sort of a plateau on ebooks, that people are saying, gee, I actually kind of like these real books, these physical books there. Clearly, you could set the amount of years, 10 years, 20 years, just sooner or later, the default for news is going to be digital. But their print is all not going away totally. For the September issue of Vogue, I think it's for a long, long time, they're going to be like, putting that thing on your doorstep there and, kicking up dust. And for, books and other things there, I mean, we had a publication that did comics called The Nib, and the editor of that did a Kickstarter to come out with a hard copy of what came out on Medium there. It's interesting working for a place where nothing of what I do is in print, right? That's different from Wired, which came out every month. Day to day, I don't miss it, but I still like print and would hate to see it go away. And I don't think it was 100% going away.
Ev, you get the last word.
I agree with the statement, it's not 100% going away. I think a lot more newspapers or daily newspapers are not going to be printed anymore within the next decade, for sure, and most magazines. And there will definitely be niche and boutique magazines. There'll definitely be books, but in a smaller number. But I think the thing that people underestimate about it right now is, in a large part, print still exists, or people that prefer print do, because we've failed with the digital side of it. It's all we've done, and this is a lot of why we're doing Medium, is we've failed to make digital better. It can be so much better, and there'll be a time when that idea of reading something and not having the real-time, qualitative network intelligence built into what you're reading will just feel like, you'll want to read some books like that. You'll want to read novels and maybe some history books like that, but in terms of your day-to-day news, certainly, or magazine-type material, the digital and networked version will be far superior in terms of experience. Screens are also getting better. User experience is getting better. So you can't compare what you feel today versus print and saying, well, that's not the game. And certainly the advertising dollars that are propping that up are lasting longer than us technologists would have expected, but it's also the case that they, at least last I knew, still plopped telephone books on every doorway in San Francisco, which is astonishing. So it'll last a while, but the digital will get better. That's the more exciting thing.
Well, Medium is a fascinating experiment. It's fun to read. You guys are doing a great job, and we're going to watch it with interest. So please join me in thanking Evan Williams and Stephen Levy.